You think your nosy sibling is your biggest problem, until their harmless snooping paints a target on your back from the most dangerous people in the country. My brother didn't just invade my privacy. He signed my death warrant and dragged our entire family into the crossfire. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The annual Vance family potluck was supposed to be warm and cheerful, but for me, it felt like walking into a pressure cooker. My brother, Kieran, had been simmering since the moment I walked in. He kept throwing small jabs, little comments about my easy remote job, my weird schedule, and how I never shared anything real. Every word felt like a warning. I could tell he was building up to something, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then it came. "So, Anya," he said loudly, interrupting everyone's chatter. His smirk stretched across his face as the entire table turned to him. "I finally figured out your little secret." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I knew that tone. I knew that look. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. He lifted his phone like a trophy. I followed her, picked the lock to her apartment, checked out her big, mysterious home office. His voice dripped with pride. Then he started swiping through photos. Images of my supposedly secure safe house turned upside down. My equipment tossed. My drawers ransacked. My coded files exposed. And guess what? He sneered. There was nothing. Just a bunch of paranoid security junk. I swear, Anya, what are you even hiding? My parents stared at him, confused. Maya covered her mouth in shock. And I felt the blood drain from my entire body. He thought he was exposing a joke. He had no idea he had just detonated a bomb. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely steady. In the hallway, my hands shook violently as I dialed a number I hoped I'd never need to call again. "Deputy Marshal Croft," I whispered when the line picked up. "It's Anya Vance. Code Nightingale. We have a critical breach." I could hear Croft's breathing change instantly. "Tell me exactly what happened." "My brother broke into the safe house," I said. "He has pictures. He showed them at dinner. I don't know who else has seen them." "All right. Stay calm," Croft ordered. "We're on our way. No one leaves that house. Do you understand?" I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Yes." When I walked back into the dining room, everyone looked up at me with confused, scared eyes. But I had already accepted what was coming. My life, the life I had built as Anya Vance, was over. And my own brother had killed it with a single act of arrogance. When I walked back into the dining room, the whole place felt heavy. No one spoke. No one moved. I stood at the end of the table and said quietly, "Nobody leaves. U.S. Marshals are on their way." My voice didn't shake, but inside I felt like the floor was slipping out from under me. Kieran's face turned pale the moment he heard those words. He tried to laugh it off at first, but the sound died in his throat when he saw that I wasn't joking. Everyone was watching me, waiting for me to explain what was happening. I knew the truth would hit them hard, but there was no way to soften it. I took a breath and told them the name they thought they knew wasn't the one I was born with. I explained that I had been living under a new identity for years, hidden away because of something dangerous I had seen long ago. I told them about the people I had stood against, people who didn't forgive or forget. Every detail came out slowly, but clearly, and I could see each word land like a blow. My mom was the first to react. Her hand flew to her mouth, and tears began to spill down her cheeks before she could stop them. My father stared at me like the world had tilted sideways, his eyes wide and empty. Maya didn't say anything. She just stared, frozen, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe I was her sister or a stranger wearing her face. Kieran kept shaking his head, whispering that it couldn't be true. He kept glancing at the door as if running would make everything disappear. When he realized that what he had done wasn't just a stupid mistake, but something that carried real danger, he looked like he was about to collapse. The room felt smaller with every passing second. My family kept waiting for me to say it was all some misunderstanding, but I couldn't give them that comfort. They needed to understand that what Kieran had done wasn't just breaking into a room. He had broken into a life that wasn't even supposed to exist in the first place. He had crossed lines he didn't know existed. My mother reached for my hand, but even her touch felt distant. My father tried to speak, but no words came out. Maya finally whispered my name, my real one, and even hearing it made something inside me twist painfully. None of them had expected to learn any of this, especially not like this, all at once, with danger already moving closer. Minutes passed slowly, filled only with breathing and fear. I wanted to comfort them, but I also knew that nothing I said would take away the shock. All I could do was stand there, watching the truth sink in, knowing that life for all of us had just changed forever. Blue lights flashed through the windows before anyone even had time to speak. Heavy footsteps filled the hallway, and then the door opened without hesitation. Deputy Marshal Croft entered first, his face set in a hard, focused look. Behind him, several officers spread out through the room, checking corners, windows, and every possible exit. They didn't waste a second, and the speed of their movements made my family sit frozen in place. Croft came straight to me, asked a few quick questions, then turned his attention to Kieran. He didn't shout or threaten him. He simply asked for his phone. Kieran hesitated, but one look at the armed officers around him made him hand it over with shaking fingers. Croft tapped through it for only a moment before his expression tightened. He stepped aside to speak quietly with one of his team, and the way both men reacted made my stomach twist. I knew something was wrong, something worse than what I had imagined. When Croft returned to us, his tone was colder than before. He told me that the pictures in the phone weren't sitting harmlessly in the gallery. They had already been uploaded online. My family gasped and Kieran's mouth fell open. Croft explained that the account wasn't fully public, but it didn't matter. Once something goes online, it moves fast. People share. People save. People talk. And a few of those images were already making their rounds. Then he explained the real problem. One of those photos had captured more than the inside of a room. Through the window, in the corner of the frame, there was a recognizable landmark. Anyone familiar with the city could use it to figure out the area. Anyone determined enough could find the exact building. I felt my chest tighten as his words settled in. It meant the place I had been living in, the place built to keep me hidden, was no longer safe. It meant the walls I trusted couldn't protect me anymore. Croft didn't sugarcoat it. He said the house was considered burned. A word that sounded simple but carried so much weight. It meant the location had to be abandoned immediately. My family sat in stunned silence. My mother covered her face with her hands. My father stared straight ahead, unable to speak. Maya kept looking at me, her eyes wide with fear. And Kieran, he just kept shaking his head, whispering that he hadn't meant for anything like this to happen. Croft stayed firm. There was no time for emotional explanations. The team began preparing for immediate relocation. Bags, documents, instructions, they handled everything with strict focus. Watching them move around the room felt surreal, as if the world had shifted into a new, darker direction. I knew then that nothing from my old life, not even the tiny pieces I had managed to build, could be saved. The identity I had worn for years was no longer mine to keep. And all it took was a single moment of carelessness from someone who never understood the danger surrounding me. Marshal Croft stepped toward Kieran with a calm, firm expression, and the room grew painfully quiet. My family watched in shock as Croft explained what would happen next. Kieran tried to back away, but there was nowhere for him to go. His hands trembled as the marshal asked him to turn around. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut felt louder than anything else in the room. The moment Croft began speaking to him in that steady, official tone, something seemed to break inside Kieran. His face lost all its color, and his breath came out in uneven gasps. He understood, finally, that this wasn't a simple mistake. This wasn't something he could joke his way out of or smooth over with excuses. His actions had crossed lines he didn't even know existed, and now there was no hiding from the consequences. He looked at me desperately, tears already filling his eyes. "I didn't know," he cried. "Anya, please believe me." His voice cracked with each word, and he kept pulling at the cuffs like he hoped they would disappear. I stood still, watching him struggle. Memories of us growing up flashed through my mind, birthdays, school days, arguments, laughter. But none of it softened what I felt now. My chest felt hollow, like something important had been scooped out and thrown away. When he begged again, I finally spoke. "You were supposed to be my family," I said quietly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It was steady, almost cold. "Family trusts each other. You didn't trust me. You chose to break into my life." He stared at me as if I had stabbed him. He kept repeating my name, trying to make me see him the way I once did, but I couldn't. The damage was already done, and nothing he said could undo it. Croft gently guided him toward the door, but Kieran fought against the officers, sobbing harder now. He kept looking over his shoulder, hoping I would rush forward, stop everything, defend him. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched as the people he had believed were exaggerating now took him away step by step. My mother broke down crying. My father stood stiff and speechless. Maya covered her mouth, staring at the floor. But none of their reactions could pull me out of the cold distance settling inside me. Kieran's cries echoed down the hallway as they led him outside. Even when he was no longer in sight, the sound stayed with me, sharp and painful. And the picture of him being pulled away, eyes red and swollen, stayed fixed in my mind. It wasn't a moment I wanted to remember, but it was one I knew I would never forget. I was given only 20 minutes, and the clock started the moment I stepped inside the apartment. The door closed behind me, and the silence felt different now. Heavy final. I looked around at the space I had worked so hard to make feel normal. The small plants by the window, the books on the shelf, the photos I had taken on quiet weekends. All of it suddenly felt like it belonged to another person. I opened the closet and pulled out a duffel bag. It looked too small to hold the pieces of a life, but it was all I was allowed to take. I moved quickly, grabbing clothes without thinking about them, shoving in whatever I could reach first. My hands shook as I worked, not from fear, but from the strange emptiness spreading inside me. This place had been my second chance. I had picked every item carefully, trying to make myself believe I could stay here long enough to grow roots. I had decorated the walls, organized my desk, learned the streets nearby, memorized the sound of the elevator, and even grown used to the quiet neighbors. Now I had to leave it all behind in minutes. I opened drawers and swept things into the bag. I didn't stop to read old notes or look at small keepsakes. There was no time to feel anything deeply. Everything had to be done fast. As I moved through each room, it felt like I was watching myself erase a person piece by piece. It was strange knowing that by the time I walked out that door, the name on the mailbox would no longer belong to me. I paused in the kitchen for a moment. My favorite mug was still sitting by the sink from that morning. I touched it lightly, feeling the warmth of memory, even though it wasn't warm anymore. I wanted to take it, but it was too simple, too fragile to explain. It stayed behind, like the rest of the life I had tried to build. I checked the time. 12 minutes left. I hurried to my desk and gathered the last of my things, papers, chargers, a few personal items. Each object I touched reminded me how hard I had worked to settle into this identity. I had made friends here. I had routines. I had plans. And now, all of that vanished in less than half an hour. The truth hit me hard. The person everyone knew as Anya Vance no longer existed. She wasn't leaving quietly. She was being erased. And the reason for that erasure wasn't the crime family from my past. It was my own brother's reckless curiosity. He had envied this life without ever understanding how fragile it truly was. I zipped the duffel bag and stood in the middle of the room one last time. A strange calm settled over me. This wasn't the kind of revenge anyone expected. No shouting, no anger, no dramatic payback. Instead, the revenge was silent and complete. Everything Kieran had been jealous of, the comfort, the safety, the new beginning, was gone forever, destroyed by his own hands. When I stepped out and closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. The person who had lived there was already gone. They drove me to a new building in the middle of the night. I wasn't told where we were going, and I wasn't allowed to look outside. When the door finally opened, I stepped into a long, quiet hallway that smelled like disinfectant. The lights were bright, the floors were plain, and everything looked the same in every direction. There were no pictures, no colors, no signs of life. It felt cold the moment I walked in. A marshal guided me to a small room at the end of the corridor. When the door closed behind me, the sound echoed like a warning. The room had a narrow bed, a metal chair, and a table that looked like it belonged in a hospital. There were no windows, no clock, and nothing personal. It was just a box made of walls and silence. My old safe house had rules and limits, but at least I could breathe there. This place felt like someone had pressed pause on the world and locked me inside it. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to steady myself, but the stillness made everything feel worse. The weight of the day pressed down on me until I could barely keep my thoughts straight. I had no idea how long I would be here. I had no idea what my future looked like anymore. There was no comfort, no sense of control, only the uneasy feeling that I had traded one kind of danger for another. A marshal came in hours later with an update. He told me that my family had been placed under strict watch. They couldn't move freely, couldn't make outside calls, and couldn't leave their home without approval. Their routines were being monitored closely, and their privacy was gone. They were stuck in their own version of a cage now, one they never asked for and never deserved. The thought of my mother waking up to strangers at the door, my father being questioned, and Maya being kept under constant eyes made my chest tighten. They had lived peacefully until now. They had never been part of the danger I carried. And yet, because of one careless choice, their entire world had changed in a single night. As I sat alone in that cold room, anger began to fill the emptiness inside me. Not the sharp, fiery kind, but a slow, heavy one that settled deep in my bones. The mob in my past was terrifying, but their threat wasn't the reason my chest felt tight. It wasn't the reason I couldn't sleep. It was Kieran. He had created this new prison for all of us without even realizing what he was doing. With his selfish need to dig into my life, he had pushed me back into a corner I thought I had escaped. He had trapped our parents in fear and forced Maya into a life where every move was watched. I lay down on the thin mattress, staring at the blank ceiling, and understood something clearly. The danger outside wasn't what haunted me the most. It was the cage my own brother had built around us, one I could not break out of, no matter how hard I tried. The screen flickered before the call connected, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing. When their faces finally appeared, the room around me seemed to shrink. My family looked nothing like the people I had left behind at the dinner table. They looked worn down, tired, and shaken in ways I had never seen before. My father sat closest to the camera. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes looked older, as if the last few days had aged him years. He tried to smile when he saw me, but it slipped almost immediately. His voice trembled as he spoke, not from anger, but from a desperate hope that didn't match the reality we were in. He kept asking me to talk to the people handling Kieran's case, to help lighten what was coming for him. Every time he mentioned my brother's name, his voice cracked a little more. It was clear he was trying to hold us together, even though the pieces were slipping through his fingers. My mother barely looked up. She sat farther back, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She looked lost, as if she was trapped somewhere inside her own mind. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked like she didn't have any tears left. Every time she glanced at me, it was with a kind of quiet heartbreak, the kind that comes from not knowing how to protect your own child from something you can't understand. And then there was Maya. She sat stiffly beside them, her jaw clenched, her eyes sharp and burning. The moment she spoke, her voice cut through the room like a blade. She didn't try to soften anything. She didn't try to pretend. She said exactly how she felt, and it was clear she wasn't willing to hide her anger just to keep the peace. Her words came out fast and fierce, directed at the mess Kieran had created and the chaos he had thrown us into. There was no confusion in her, no hesitation. Only disappointment and frustration. Their voices overlapped at times. My father begging for unity, my mother whispering my name like a plea, Maya refusing to let the truth be buried under excuses. I listened to them speak, but I felt like I was standing behind glass, unable to reach them. It hurt to see how quickly the trust between them was breaking. It hurt even more knowing that nothing I said would put it back together. I wanted to comfort them, to explain everything in a way that made sense, but every word felt too small. They weren't just dealing with danger. They were dealing with the realization that one choice had shattered the balance in our family. As the call came to an end, the screen faded into darkness, leaving me alone again. And for the first time, I understood that this fracture wasn't temporary. It was the start of a divide none of us knew how to cross. Deputy Marshal Croft came into the room with a heavy look on his face. I could tell something was wrong even before he spoke. He sat down across from me and took a slow breath, as if choosing his words carefully. When he finally told me the news, it felt like the floor under me shifted. He said the Lombardi family had already learned about the breach. Somehow, the information had moved fast, faster than anyone expected. They now knew that someone in this city was in witness protection, and that person had been compromised. My chest tightened as I listened. It was the kind of news I had always feared, the reason I stayed hidden, the reason I lived by strict rules. And now, all of it had been shaken because of one thoughtless act. Croft explained that the Lombardis had a wide network, people who were loyal to them and always hungry for information. Once the breach happened, that network woke up like a sleeping beast. They started moving, searching, listening, trying to connect the dots. The quiet safety I once had was gone. The danger wasn't a distant shadow anymore. It was walking closer, step by step. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak. Croft's face stayed calm, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He wasn't talking to me like an officer giving instructions. He was talking like someone who knew the risk better than anyone. He said they were now tracking unusual movement in the city. Strangers asking questions, cars that didn't belong, people who had no reason to be near certain areas. It was the kind of pattern that told them the Lombardis were searching. Every word he said made the weight on my chest grow heavier. I knew the Lombardis were patient. They didn't rush. They hunted slowly, carefully, like they enjoyed the process. The idea that they were now active, all because of Kieran's reckless behavior, filled me with a cold anger. This wasn't a small mistake. It was the kind that changed lives forever. Croft reminded me to stay alert, to follow every instruction exactly, to not trust anything that felt out of place. I nodded, even though my mind was spinning. When he left the room, the silence felt sharper. The walls seemed closer. I sat there, trying to breathe, trying to understand how everything had shifted in just a few hours. The truth was bitter. The danger I had run from had found a path back to me. And it wasn't by accident. It was because the person who shared my blood had opened a door he never should have touched. The day they brought the legal papers, I could feel the tension in the room like a heavy weight. My family hovered close, whispering among themselves, their eyes darting toward me for guidance. My father's voice shook as he tried to explain the offer. This could make everything easier for him, he said. For all of us. My mother held her hands together tightly, urging me gently, while Maya's glare at Kieran burned through the air. Each of them looked to me, as if my words could somehow fix the chaos he had caused. Kieran sat across from me, handcuffed, head lowered. He didn't speak, but the pleading in his eyes was enough. He hoped I would intervene, that I would go to the lawyers, speak a word for him, and somehow reduce the storm he had brought into all our lives. But I couldn't. I wasn't the person he thought I was. I wasn't the sister who could forgive recklessness so easily. The prosecutor explained the terms again. Kieran could tell them everything, how he broke into my home, what he saw, who else he might have contacted. If he cooperated fully, his punishment would be lighter. If he refused, he would face the full weight of the law. Kieran's face shifted from fear to hope as he heard it, almost desperate to reach out to me for guidance. My family leaned toward me, voices soft but urgent. Please, my father said. Help him. Tell him it's the right thing. Don't let him ruin everything more than he already has. My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Even Maya, whose anger had never hidden, muttered under her breath, urging me to say something. I stayed quiet. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. My chest felt tight, but I didn't flinch. My mind was clear. Kieran had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. He couldn't turn back time or erase the consequences of his curiosity, and I couldn't shield him from what he had done. I had faced danger and betrayal myself, and I knew the cost of someone else's mistake. I watched Kieran lift his head slightly, searching my face for any sign of leniency. But there was none. My silence spoke louder than any word I could have said. It was the consequence he hadn't expected but deserved. His actions had fractured trust, destroyed safety, and altered our lives. I wasn't going to undo that. The lawyers moved on to other matters, leaving the choice entirely in Kieran's hands. My family looked at me, anxious, but I didn't change my stance. I wasn't cruel, I was firm. He had set everything into motion, and now he needed to face the result. As the meeting ended, I realized that this was my form of justice. I wasn't seeking punishment in anger or revenge through violence. I was allowing the consequences to exist fully, letting him experience the outcome of his own decisions. That day, I understood that sometimes the hardest choice is staying silent, letting actions speak louder than words. They handed me the new identity in a sealed envelope, and for a moment I just stared at it. The name written on it didn't feel like mine, but it was the only name I was allowed to have now. Everything connected to who I had been was being erased. I stood in a small room with plain walls, trying to breathe as the reality settled in. Once I stepped out with this new identity, the world would never call me by my old name again. I would walk through a new city where no one knew me, and no one ever could. The officers gave me a short moment alone to send a final message. It had to be typed on a secure device, checked, and approved. I kept it simple. I told my family that I cared about them and wished them peace. I didn't explain anything deeper. I couldn't. I only said what was allowed and pressed send. It felt like placing a small stone on a grave. There would be no reply, no follow-up calls, no chance to explain myself fully. It was one final goodbye. As I waited for the transport car to arrive, I sat quietly and thought about Kieran. Not with anger, but with a heavy acceptance. He had chased answers he never needed. He had pushed past every boundary, thinking nothing could truly break. He had believed the worst thing he could lose was my trust. He never imagined he could lose me entirely. The new life they prepared for me felt like stepping into empty air. I wouldn't be able to visit old places, send messages, or look back. My old favorite foods, the streets I loved, the people who once knew my laugh. Every part of that had to be left behind. I would become someone who moved carefully, quietly, almost like a shadow. It wasn't death, but it felt close to it. When they finally called my new name, it sounded strange and distant. I stood up anyway. The escort opened the door, and the light outside felt colder than before. I didn't know what waited for me on the other side of the journey, only that it wouldn't include familiar faces. I walked forward without looking back. The life I had once fought so hard to build had been taken apart piece by piece, and now I was stepping into a future built on secrecy and distance. Somewhere far away, Kieran would live with the knowledge that his curiosity had pushed me into this silent exile. He had wanted answers, and now the price of those answers was my absence. My disappearance would follow him longer than any sentence.